Under the molten sky of late afternoon, the desert stretched in all directions like an ocean of silence. Shadows lengthened across the red earth, and the air trembled with heat, as though the land itself held its breath. From the distance came the faint scuff of boots, the weary gait of a man who had long since learned the ways of solitude. Caleb Boone, rancher of 29 years, tall and broad as the mesas he rode past, walked with reins slack in his hand, searching for a stray calf that had wandered too far from his herd. His horse snorted, restless beneath the fading sun, but Caleb's eyes had caught upon something unusual, something lying still by a dry watering hole half covered in dust and shadow. At first he thought it a trick of the light, or perhaps a fallen bundle left behind by travelers. But as he drew near, his chest tightened. It was a woman. Her dark hair spilled across the cracked ground, tangled with grit, her skin marked with the weariness of both journey and sorrow. She stirred faintly, lips parting as though each breath cost her more than she could afford. When Caleb dismounted, careful not to startle her, she whispered words that struck him like a bullet. "Please, don't beat me, I'm already broken." The plea shattered the stillness. Caleb froze, his throat tightening with a sorrow that was not his own. He had seen cruelty, men who laughed at the suffering of others, who treated the vulnerable as lesser. But to hear such words so plainly as though they were expected burned through him. He lowered himself to one knee, his shadow falling across her face. "No harm will come from me," he said softly, voice roughened by years of silence. He reached for his canteen, uncorked it, and held it close without touching her. "Water. That's all." Her eyes, the color of storm clouds gathering on the horizon, flicked up to him, wary and wounded. For a moment she did not move, and Caleb feared she would turn away from even this small offering. But then, with trembling hands, she took the canteen and drank. The water ran down her chin, catching the light, and when she stopped, she pressed the metal container back into his hand with a careful grace. "Thank you," she whispered, though the words seemed pulled from her as if they weighed more than she could bear. He wanted to ask who she was, where she had come from, why she lay alone on this merciless ground. But questions felt too sharp, too sudden for a soul so fragile. So instead, he sat back on his heels, giving her space, letting the desert wind carry the silence between them. His horse shifted behind him, hooves striking the earth, and far away a coyote sang the sun into its descent. She gathered herself enough to sit, her back straight though her body trembled. Her gaze flicked toward him, suspicious, then away again as if fearing what she might find in his eyes. At last she said, her voice barely more than the rustle of dry grass, "They took everything. My people, scattered. My spirit, crushed." The words carved into Caleb, though he did not yet know the full shape of her story. He only knew the emptiness in her tone, the resignation of one who had been pushed too often against the edge of despair. He thought of his own life, of nights spent alone in a ranch house too big for one man, of wealth that brought him neither comfort nor companionship, of townsfolk who treated him with respect yet kept their distance. Loneliness he knew. But loneliness of choice was not the same as loneliness by violence. "Stay here," he said gently, rising to his feet. He built a fire with the care of one tending to a sacred thing, coaxing warmth into the desert night. He cooked beans in his tin pot, set bread on a flat stone, all the while conscious of her watchful gaze. She did not eat until he moved back, until she was certain no trick lingered in his kindness. When at last she took the food, chewing slowly, her shoulders lowered just enough to show the faintest hint of relief. The firelight painted her features, highlighting both youth and weariness. She could not have seen more than 23 summers, yet her eyes held centuries. Caleb found himself humming, unthinking, an old frontier song his mother once sang when storms rattled the windows. The tune drifted into the air, mingling with the crackle of flames. Her lashes fluttered, her body eased, and for the first time since he'd found her, she closed her eyes. Sleep came to her quickly, but for Caleb it came slow. He watched the desert beyond the fire's reach, the long shadows, the stars prickling through velvet black. He wondered who she was, what pain had driven her into the wilderness, and why fate had placed her in his path. When the coyotes quieted and only the wind whispered, he found himself whispering too, a promise she could not hear. "You are safe here." Morning brought the world into gold and ochre. She stirred, sitting up, her hair a dark river across her shoulders. For a long while neither spoke. Then she said, "My name is Ayoka." The syllables carried weight as though spoken for the first time in a long while. Caleb nodded. "Caleb Boone." Her gaze lingered on him as though measuring his worth. Finally she spoke again, halting but firm. "You should not help me. Townsfolk will talk. They always talk. He shrugged. Let them. But her warning struck deep. Caleb knew the way whispers could sour into judgment, how eyes could follow and tongues could wound. He had endured their distance. He could endure it still. What unsettled him was not their scorn but the shadow of fear in her voice, as though she had lived too long under its lash. He saddled his horse, offered her a hand, and when she hesitated, he lowered it, waiting. Trust, he knew, was not to be demanded. At last she placed her hand lightly into his, and he lifted her into the saddle as though she were made of glass. Together they rode toward his ranch, the desert opening before them like a path chosen by destiny itself. The homestead rose from the hills, a sturdy house of timber and stone, surrounded by corrals and wide fields browned by drought. To most, it would have seemed a place of prosperity. To Caleb it was emptiness made solid. Yet when Ayoka dismounted and her eyes swept across the land, he felt for the first time that perhaps it might become something more. Inside, the house echoed with quiet. Dust motes floated in the shafts of light through the windows. Ayoka touched the wooden table, the iron stove, the faded curtains, as if memorizing each detail. So much space, she murmured. And yet so hollow. Her words struck true. Caleb felt the hollowness in his chest, mirrored in the walls around him. But as days passed, the hollowness began to shift. She tended horses with a gentle hand, taught him how to read signs in the desert wind, sang soft melodies when she thought he was too far to hear. He, in turn, cooked meals for her, repaired her torn clothing, guided her through town though he could feel the weight of every stare. In town, whispers clung like burrs. Men tipped hats stiffly, women narrowed their eyes. Caleb ignored them, but Ayoka's shoulders hunched, her spirit folding under the invisible weight. That night, by firelight, she asked, "Why invite such scorn?" He searched for the right words, then spoke with quiet conviction. "Because you are not shame. You are strength." Her breath caught, her eyes shimmering in the glow. Yet doubt lingered, hers and his. He wondered if kindness was enough, if the desert would allow them peace. She wondered if trust could ever be rebuilt on land that had stolen so much. One evening, the sky darkened with storm. Thunder rolled, lightning split the heavens, and rain lashed against the earth. In the chaos, Ayoka slipped away from the ranch, convinced she was burden, danger, unwanted weight. Caleb found her beneath a lone mesquite, the storm painting her in silver and shadow. He stepped into the downpour, his hat dripping, his breath ragged. With trembling hands, he drew from his pocket a small silver ring, worn smooth by time. It had belonged to his mother, the only thing of hers he kept close. He sank to one knee in the mud, the storm raging around them, and held it out. "Not to own you," he said, voice breaking through wind and rain, "but to walk beside you." Her eyes widened, tears mingling with the rain. The storm seemed to still, the world pausing for her answer. For a long heartbeat, silence reigned. Then slowly she reached out, her fingers closing over his. "Yes," she whispered. The storm moved on, leaving behind the smell of wet earth and the promise of new growth. They returned together, not as rescuer and rescued, but as two souls who had found in each other what the desert had nearly taken: dignity, hope, and the possibility of love. And when years later their story was spoken of, told by firelight or whispered in town, it was not of scandal but of strength. For people remembered the rancher and the native woman who defied the whispers, who built a life not from pity but from grace. And if you listen closely as I did, you may hear the lesson in their tale, that even in the harshest desert, even when broken, the heart can find a home where it is seen, not shamed, and cherished into wholeness.